Hi, everyone. My name is Annie Swarzak with ADT Mag, and I'd like to thank you all for joining us. The topic of today's webcast is Architects, Executives, App Modernization Projects. Why do they fail? Sponsored by vFunction. Before we begin, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping details. We will have a Q&A session at the end of today's event, so please type any questions you may have in the Q&A box. vFunction has provided some resources which correspond with today's event, so please take a moment to check those out. Today's webcast is being recorded, so keep an eye out for a link in your email to re-watch the presentation or share with a colleague. And now I'd like to introduce you to today's speakers. Today we have the pleasure of hearing from Moti Rafalin, CEO of vFunction, and Kelly Fitzpatrick, Senior Industry Analyst at RedMonk. So we are in for a great event, and with that, I'll pass the time over to Kelly to get us started.
Hey everyone, I hope you're having a great day so far, and want to echo again Annie's thank you for joining us. We are here to talk today about app modernization. vFunction has done some very interesting research on kind of app modernization, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But first, I want to spend a little bit time talking about app modernization itself, kind of as a concept, some of the kind of contextual things that might be useful to have in your head before we dig into these very interesting survey results. And it's worth noting that as an industry analyst, and I work for a company called RedMonk, which is a kind of developer or practitioner-focused analyst firm, I do not represent any specific vendor, and my job is to not only follow tech trends, but kind of help people understand them. So I just wanted to make sure that you understood my point of view before I start talking about things like app modernization and cloud native and all of the other kind of good things that I'm hoping to cover in the next few minutes before I hand things over to Moti. Now, app modernization is something that we have heard so much about, especially in the last year or two, almost hand in hand with this other kind of concept that we've heard more and more about, which is kind of digital transformation. App modernization is not in and of itself a new concept, and in fact, it's kind of, I think, key to remember that for folks who have been in the industry for a while, app modernization may be something that they've been through more than one time already. In some ways, the tech industry is great in that we're always developing new ways to address problems. We're always coming up with new solutions and new way of doing things. But this means that modern application development and modern applications themselves, those concepts are all kind of like an ever-moving target. And the modern itself, in a way, is always moving. So app modernization is certainly not something that is static. And the purpose and goals of modernization kind of keep moving along with that understanding of app modernization as well. Now, here in 2022, one of the kind of motivations and kind of factors into this concept of app modernization is definitely the cloud. And in fact, many app modernization products or projects are highly motivated by the vast kind of potential and affordances of the cloud. Of course, the cloud is never just about moving workloads and moving applications to the cloud. It's not enough to just be on the cloud. Now we're talking also about cloud native architectures, which bring with them affordances that older ways of building and running and thinking about software, simply do not have. So technologies such as containers, managed services, serverless innovations, just changes in how we build and run and monitor and secure software and deliver software are all big pieces of the motivation for many app modernization products. Often taking advantage of all of these affordances of cloud native often can require many things. One of the things that we're kind of seeing people having to do in order to kind of modernize the kind of applications that they already have is the breaking down of monolithic applications into microservices. Now, microservices is, again, it's a term that's not entirely new. It's, if you've been around for the past however many, past couple of years, you definitely have heard of it. This is an image of Uber's kind of microservices map, which I think is kind of fascinating, because when we think of microservices, we often think of, oh, you're breaking down a monolith into smaller pieces. It's easier to, change one piece without thinking of another. But of course, with a kind of map of microservices like you see in front of you right now, often comes with it kind of some complexity. So don't even think beyond just the microservices that go along in on a map like this, but think of the APIs that kind of go with them as well. So there can be some kind of trickiness, some complexity in the kind of breakdown of monoliths into microservices, but along with that often comes greater flexibility, which is, again, one of the reasons that folks consider app modernization projects. Flexibility is often thought of as being tied to velocity, which is something that we're seeing an increased appetite for velocity in this day and age. Velocity often is seen as going hand in hand with agility, the ability for folks to kind of move fast and also kind of accommodate changing conditions, which is something we've seen almost everybody have to do in the past 2 to 3 years. And while a lot of industry kind of conversation focuses on velocity, I think it's important to note that quality is often seen as just as important and is a driver for many of these kind of ways of thinking about building software that are driving app modernization projects. And when we talk about kind of quality and velocity and their relationship between them, one of the key pieces of research that we see kind of come up time and time again is the State of DevOps report, which is, I still call it the DORA report, back from when it was the DevOps Research and Assessment team that was kind of putting this together. That was, of course, acquired by Google. But what you see in front of you right now is the results from the latest Accelerate State of DevOps report, which continues to tell us that it is not only possible to move fast without breaking things, but that elite performing teams do both, that there's actually a relationship between being able to move fast and delivering higher quality software. Now, I want to talk a little bit about teams, since we were just looking at a diagram and talking about some of the qualities of kind of elite and high-performing teams. And I think when we're talking about app modernization, it's really important to remember that app modernization is not just about technology, and it is not just about modernizing and adapting technology or choosing not to, but that modernizing applications or choosing not to modernize applications can have profound effects on the people that are involved in producing, maintaining, and operating software. Now, along with thinking about the people who do this, the teams involved in software, I think it's also very important, especially in this day and age, to think about the kind of the training and the talent that is involved in kind of putting together these teams and optimizing these teams for building, operating, and even modernizing software. And we are kind of still coming off of the back end of what has been called the Great Resignation. Things have been changing a little bit more to the point where we're still seeing people kind of going from job to job, but perhaps under slightly different conditions. But one of the things that I think it's important to think about is the resources that you are devoting to training and upskilling and kind of making sure that your teams know and have the resources that they need in order to do their job. Are you devoting these resources to figuring out new and better ways of building software? Or are you spending this energy to maintain less productive processes and kind of ways of doing things? And I think it's important to think about, how does this affect how you hire, how you retain talent, and what does this mean for your ability to innovate, not only in the short term, but in the long term? So these are just all some kind of trends and thoughts that we tend to have in the back of our mind when we're looking at app modernization. And before I hand things over to Moti, I want to talk a little bit about programming languages. What you see in front of you right now is the latest incarnation of the RedMonk programming language rankings. This is something that my firm does twice a year. And we've been doing it for about the last 10 years now. The newest ranking should be out in the next month or so. And I think one thing, when we talk about modern application development and we think about the way people are building software, people tend to always go to whatever the kind of flashiest or hottest language is. But one thing I think that's really interesting about our language rankings, especially in light of the research that we're going to look at today, which I believe, and Moti will correct me if I'm wrong, focuses on folks who built and are modernizing Java applications, is that languages like Java, languages like C# from the kind of like .NET shops are still things that we see being used, being talked about, and Java especially has kind of found some ways to adapt to more modern architecture surprisingly well. So I think it's important to note that, language, especially when you're talking about developers and the, kind of talent retention and hiring and how people think about where they fit in the larger software world can be very important. And that languages like Java are still things that are in play and are not going the way of, say, COBOL anytime soon. And with that, I'm going to hand things over to Moti so that we can start digging into the results of the research that vFunction has conducted.
Thank you very much, Kelly. And I think it's a great segue. You mentioned Java. To be honest, yes, a lot of it is Java, but we didn't specify Java. But as you can see, we commissioned this report and we went to try to solicit kind of information and answers from organizations that have been around for 15 years. And so obviously there's a majority of Java there, although we didn't necessarily specify, but I do think it's a great point that there is a lot of Java applications in these organizations. So we commissioned this. First, we went after large organizations, 5,000 employees that have been around for 15 years, and we've asked people from the minimal seniority of the director all the way to CTOs. And I'm very excited to share these results. There are some interesting kind of insights that I'd love to unpack with everyone and share a little bit kind of our experience in trying to understand those trends. So first, how many are actually embarked on these modernization projects? And it's very interesting to know that 92% either are thinking, started, or in the midst of a modernization project. I don't know if this is surprising or not, but if you have software, as Kelly mentioned, at some point you need to modernize it. That's just the nature of software development. You can see here kind of how it breaks down, but I think that the net of it is that a vast majority, I would say maybe even everyone at some point needs to modernize. According to the survey, it's 92%. In terms of why is it really difficult, and we're going to go deeper into that in a few minutes. I think these three stats are probably the leading indicators of why people are hesitant to embark on these projects, why there's a lot of pushback with regard to these types of projects. And the three stats are just in front of you here, right? 79% of these modernization projects fail. Now, what is exactly the definition of failure? We can go into that in a minute, but they don't meet the expectations, right? They don't meet the budget, they don't meet the timeline, and many times they don't meet the kind of anticipated result. They're very costly, on average $1.5 million, and in terms of time, it's 16 months, but 30, that's the average, and 30% are even 24 months and more. So these are kind of the three stats that kind of make it very clear that there's a very high cost of failure here, just in terms of the time and the resources. So let's try to first unpack what is the definition of modernization, because there's a lot of confusion in the market. Many people use modernization to describe different types of projects. When we asked the people in the survey, 60% defined refactoring as modernization. I can share with you that another 30% said rewriting. So the vast majority do understand that modernization has to do with either rewriting or refactoring the application. And it is really important to be clear about the definition of what modernization is, because there's a lot of confusion in the market. Some people lump kind of rehosting or replatforming as a modernization effort. I'm not going to argue with them. They want to lump that as modernization. Fine, as long as everyone understands what would be the outcome of that project. And we're going to go into that also in a minute. So what are, as mentioned, what are the goals of modernization, right? Why do people embark on these modernization projects? And it's interesting because we sort of separated it between executives and architects, because occasionally they have different answers. I don't think that here it's too significant, but as we share additional questions, you will see that there is some difference, and it obviously depends, on your point of view around this project. So the three things that are obvious: you want to innovate faster, you want to increase your engineering velocity, you have scalability problems. I would say that these are the three big buckets that everyone understands that you need to address. Many times, of course, it is tied to the accumulation of technical debt. Over time, you accumulate technical debt, which, again, prevents you from releasing software quickly, from ramping up developers, as Kelly mentioned before. All that impacts your ability to innovate and to release fast and to have your software be scalable. Now, if you're thinking about migrating to the cloud, as mentioned before, and you think about the benefits that the cloud, that the hyperscalers have to offer, all the modern services, as mentioned, serverless, for example, if you have a monolithic application, you can take advantage of serverless, right? You can take advantage of any type of elastic technology, right, that allows your application to be elastic, right? So that is definitely a driver of why you would want to modernize. Project face many obstacles. 97% predict that there's going to be pushback, right, in the organization. And actually, I'm not really surprised when you think about those three factors: the cost and the time and the risk that's associated, the failure rate, which is translated into risk. Yes, of course, people don't want to or are reluctant to embark on these projects. But the problem is that if you are the decision maker, let's say if you're the CTO, the CIO, the chief architect, or senior developer, whatever the role is, at the end of the day, you're between the rock and the hard place. Because if you don't modernize, then you're facing all those challenges that we mentioned before. You can't innovate fast enough. You can't can get the scalability that you want to get. You're not able to be elastic and take advantage of the cloud. So that is if you don't embark on this modernization. And of course, the other end of the spectrum is that you do embark and then you fail, right? So damn if you do, damn if you don't. And let's try to unpack how you can still embark on these projects and increase your success rate. Of course, going back to that notion of damn if you do, damn if you don't, maintaining this monolith is fraught with real challenges. As mentioned, keeping up with the business, ramping up new developers. Let's say we're in a very competitive market for talent, right? Even today with the downturn, it is still hard to get, very strong developers. And if you have this monolithic application of 15 million lines of code, try to ramp up a developer into that application and get that developer productive quickly. That is a very difficult task, and many developers don't want even to work on these large monoliths, right? So again, if you want to be attractive to your developers, that is a real challenge. Now, if you break those monoliths into microservices, you can ramp up your developers quickly on specific services, have them own those services, start innovate, add more features. These are things that by modernizing the application, you can definitely address. So, the developers and the team is definitely a big aspect of this. The technical debt, the long release cycles, inability to scale, all these are the challenges that you have with your monolithic applications. Now, why do these projects fail, right? This is the core question that we're talking about. And this is interesting when you ask executives versus the architects, right? So the executives tell you immediately that it has to do with setting the right expectations. They were thinking that they were going to get one thing, and eventually they got something else. So that is the number one reason that they see. And when you ask architects, they go into the technology and they say, we actually lack tools to help us address this monumental problem, right? And then, of course, it's costly, and getting the org structure, getting the right team on board. When you modernize, of course, if you don't have the right team or the right org structure, again, that will impact your ability to succeed in these projects. But again, I want to focus on these setting expectations and the technology. So let's talk about setting expectations. And a good way to think about modernization, also is tied to something that you mentioned, Kelly, there, is that the more you modernize, the more value you get from the cloud. And what we're trying to do, at least in this slide, is sort of to capture the different quote-unquote modernization strategies and what are the benefits that you would get, right? So if you start with migration, and that could be either rehosting the applications or replatforming them, the benefits that you're going to get are limited, right? I can't say that there are no benefits. There are benefits, definitely on the DevOps side, on the security side, portability. There are benefits in taking a monolith and throwing it into a container, right? But you're not going to get the accelerated engineering velocity. You're not going to be able to innovate faster. You're not going to get the elasticity, right? Putting a monolith in a container doesn't turn the application to be an elastic application, right? So that is where it has to do with setting the expectations. Are you actually modernizing, or are you just focusing on migration? By the way, sometimes there are other benefits I didn't mention, right? You may want to get rid of some old licenses or some frameworks, and you just replatform them, and that's great, but you're not getting, as mentioned, those benefits. In order to get the accelerated engineering velocity, the ability to innovate faster, you turn your application into something that can take advantage of the elasticity that the cloud has to offer, you need to go deep into the code and either refactor it, re-architect, or rewrite it, right? And that is true modernization. And by the way, if I may just mention here, that might be one thing that you do initially, right, to transform your legacy or monolith into, let's say, microservices, but you don't stop there, right? If you want to continue to gain the benefits, reap the benefits of the cloud, and not fall back into the situation that got you into this problem in the first place, you need to continuously modernize. So modernizing is not a one-time thing. You want to continuously, remove dead code, make sure that your code is high quality, not too complicated. That is something that you need to watch on an ongoing basis. And especially if you adopt, let's say, modern CI/CD, and let's say you deploy your software at a much higher frequency, then if you don't remove technical debt, the fact that you're deploying at a high frequency actually exacerbates the problem, because then you're compounding the accumulation of your technical debt. So these two things go hand in hand. You want continuous delivery and continuous integration. You also need to do continuous modernization, so you don't fall back into that original one. Any comment on this, Kelly?
And Moti, we've talked about this before. I think I love this slide so much. I love the concept of continuous modernization. And that's coming from me, where I am used to dealing with so many buzzwords. And when people create buzzwords, sometimes they throw continuous in front of something, and there you have a new buzzword. But I feel like continuous modernization it speaks to a mindset that I think is almost necessary in this day and age when you're talking about software and how the continually changing way that we build and think about software. And continuous modernization, I think, captures that perfectly.
Yeah, and by the way, I just want to go back also applying this to setting expectations. Many times management would mandate migration to the cloud by a certain date, X percentage of, let's say, the workloads need to be on the cloud. And so the organization rushes and tries to do their best to lift and shift and get to the cloud as quickly as possible. And that is where the misexpectations are, because many times when you lift and shift a monolith or a bunch of monoliths to the cloud, the cost actually will go up and not down. So you may get the sticker shock, and then you hit the brakes and say, okay, we need to reevaluate our modernization strategy. Are we doing the right thing? And I would argue not for every application. By the way, I wouldn't advocate that you need to modernize every application. If an application, doesn't change a lot, you don't have scalability problems. Yeah, so you can leave it as is, and you can lift it and shift it to the cloud by all means. But if you're looking to gain cost benefits, you want the elasticity, you're not going to get it by lifting and shifting it. So that has to do with setting the right expectations there. Another example about setting expectations, and maybe this slide is a little bit too busy, but let me explain the concept of what we're trying to say here. Many times what clients see or senior management sees is the UI, right? That is the user experience. You see the front end of the application. That's where you're interacting with the application. And so many times the pressure is we need a modern UI. We need to go quickly and modernize the application. And so what people do, they take many times sort of the shorter route, which is, okay, let's build a new UI. Let's put the APIs in place and let's build a modern front end. The problem with that approach, and where, again, the expectations are misset, is that would look super nice the first week, the first 2 weeks. But then once you need to add a feature, once you need to make modifications, you're still stuck with a legacy monolithic backend that really prevents you from continuously kind of improving your UI, even though the first day it looked very nice and shiny. And so this is where I would argue you're better off doing the heavy lifting of first decomposing the business logic, break that into microservices, and then build micro front ends for each of those services. That will yield a sustainable approach to having a modern UI. So that again has to do with setting expectations, right? So first, the right strategy. Two, start with the business logic and only then move to the UI. Don't look for the quick wins, so to speak, by having a nice UI that you can't actually modify the next day.
Moti, I love that. And I also love that there's an order to modernizing an application, or there should be some type of order to it. Like, what steps do you do? But also, you don't have to modernize everything all at once, I think is something that we've definitely talked about in the past. But I wanted to make sure that you spoke a little bit about here today.
Absolutely. I'll share another example with regard to front end. So one challenge is, yes, you modernize the front end, but you didn't modernize the back end, then you haven't gained the engineering velocity that you were seeking. That is one problem. Another problem has to do with scalability. So, there was this bank that they added a new API layer to their banking application so customers can access their account from their mobile device, right? All of a sudden, once customers have access to their account, they can deposit checks, they can actually interact with their account from their palm, right? The traffic went up 10x. The minute that the traffic went up 10x and they're still working with the same backend, the backend couldn't scale. So again, they had to go back and decompose the backend, break it into services, and then be able to utilize, on-demand elasticity services, all the things that, again, the cloud has to offer. But again, without breaking the monolith, the backend, you can't get those benefits. They were simply down for a few hours, and they were really struggling with, the launch of a new mobile app. Again, setting expectations is super important. So, the most difficult steps, right, in these modernization projects, of course, is securing the budget and the resources. I feel that I'm maybe even repeating myself because it has to do with the risk, right? When it is so costly and it takes so much time, it's hard to secure the budget and the resources. And again, if I put myself in the shoes of a CIO, if it's on average, it's 16 months, but usually it takes 2 years, I may be in another job by that time. So why would I start this risky project that maybe my successor may or may not reap the benefits, right? So again, it's almost that all the incentives are against doing the modernization, but if you don't do them, again, you may lose your job because you're not able to innovate fast enough. So, securing the budget, knowing what to modernize, having the right staff, again, these are the most difficult steps. And if, going back to setting expectations and tying it to those, the difficult aspects of the modernization projects, another suggestion that I may have is, analyze and build a business case, right, in order to support the modernization. So if you're able to first quantify the technical debt across your application estate, and then have a data-driven prioritization of which applications it makes most sense to modernize. Where will you see the biggest bang for the buck? Where is the engineering velocity really hurting you? Where do you have those scalability problems? And only then prioritize those applications where you have the maximum ROI as the initial applications to get those, not quick wins, but initial wins. That is how you'd be better off when you make the decision of which applications to modernize. The reason I'm putting it under sort of the umbrella of setting expectations is that, again, if you take an application that maybe did not have those pain points, and you invest all the time and money in the modernization of that application, then people may ask, once you complete it, okay, what were the benefits of doing this modernization? Where can I see those benefits? And so you need to choose the applications that have the biggest pain points in order to be able to show that ROI once you conduct those modernization projects. And, just a framework that I would suggest as you think about these applications, the way that I would think about it is, simple, consultants 2x2 metrics, right? Refactoring effort. Think about the refactoring effort that after you're able to quantify it using the right tools, and what is the level of technical debt, right? And so, of course, if the refactoring effort is low and the technical debt is low, you may not need to refactor that application. That's totally fine to lift and shift it. If the refactoring effort is very high, but again, there's a low technical debt, again, you can re-platform and that's okay. But if the refactoring effort is low and the technical debt is high, by all means, go and modernize that application. You will see the highest ROI there. And of course, if it is both difficult to refactor and you have a high degree of technical debt, you should embark on this modernization project, but do it in an iterative manner where you do it, one service at a time. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Strangler approach. Do one service, second service, test them, see that you reap the benefits of those services, and continue as needed. Again, many times you may not need to refactor the entire application. And by the way, when you break an application into those services, I would put total rewriting the application under that category of refactoring, because you take an application, you break it into separate services, you have well-defined interfaces. Then it becomes an easier decision if you want to rewrite some or all of those services. But first, remove the risk, decompose it, have those APIs in place, and then decide if you want to rewrite some of these services. So just, again, framework to think about this. I mentioned, the challenges with refactoring are the time and obviously the difficulty around them. And then when we ask, in the survey, okay, so what are the secrets to successful projects? You can see that having, the 62% of the respondents mentioned having the proper resources and tools, right? If you have the right organization, it's almost the inverse of what leads to the failure, right, of these projects. So if you do have the business case, if you do prioritize the applications correctly, if you set the expectations, if in terms of schedule and budget and the benefits, but again, it always has to go back to the pain points, right? Choose those where you can identify the pain points. And then using the right technology, that will help increase the chances of a successful modernization project. Again, I think this might be a little bit of a repetition, but in terms of guidance for success, mentioned, make the case, and in order to make the case, first analyze the portfolio, right? Understand the architectural complexity of those applications, understand the level of technical debt and the risk that's associated with maintaining these applications as is, and only then prioritize them. Secure the budget and the resources. This is not something that you can use or take some shortcuts. You need to get the right budget in place and have the right resources. And many times, also something to keep in mind, you actually need to put your best developers on these projects. This is not a side project that you can give maybe to unexperienced developers, or let's say your developers that are not at the ranked at the top of your team. You actually need your best people to work on these projects. Consistent support, again, has to do with the team and having the management on board, define, align, and train the team to do that, have the right tools. All of these are things that, while many people know them, many times you embark on these projects, again, under pressure for the wrong reasons, trying to show quick results, moving to the cloud, where we have to shut down our data center by July 2023. So we need to quickly forget modernization. Let's just quickly lift and shift. That's fine. That might be a very good first step. Lift and shift the applications to the cloud, right? First, shut down your data center, but beware and make sure that you set the expectations correctly, that the journey doesn't stop there, right? That was just the first step. Get to the cloud. Now you need to modernize the applications, or at least a subset of them, in order to reap the benefits. I think we have a few minutes, though. I do want to take the opportunity to share with you sort of an ROI model. It's a simple kind of back of the envelope sort of ROI model that maybe you want to use when you think about modernization, and why, for example, you want to use AI and automation to accelerate the projects, to remove some of the risk. And so if we take an example of an application, let's say 7,000 classes application, I would say that's kind of a medium complexity of an application based on what we've seen. And let's say that without any automation, and being probably aggressive here, might take you 2 years with 6 developers on this project. So for 2 years, you got 12 FTEs, that, in today's prices, depending on which geography you are, but let's say it's about $1.8 million of a project, just the straight labor that's associated with this type of modernization. But this is what I want to actually emphasize. You have to incorporate the risk in this equation. And so if the success rate is only 30%, could be lower, but let's take, for the sake of this example, and back of the envelope calculation, if the success rate is 30%, then you need to divide this 1.8 million by 0.3, and then you get a 6 million kind of risk-adjusted cost for this project. And if you think about this intuitively, what does that mean? It means that in all kind of, for all intents and purposes, you end up spending more than you initially thought. So it's not going to be the 1.8 million. It's probably not going to be 2 years. You may go into 3 and 4 and sometimes more until you're able to finish that project. So that's just the risk-adjusted sort of cost of a modernization project. And if talking about this simple example, let's say that you use some technology to accelerate this. Obviously vFunction is one example. Then you reduce the number of people that are associated, that have to work on this project. You reduce the time that is required for this project. But the biggest value proposition is actually the risk reduction, right? So you increase the chances of success up to 90%, and then when you divide that number by 90%, you get risk adjusted of 850. Then you get like a 7x ROI when you incorporate risk. Even if you don't incorporate risk, you still get more than 2 times, right? The benefits when you use technology in these projects. So you have to seek, how to remove risk from these projects. Automation, artificial intelligence are the kind of the tools that can help you address that challenge. So, we get here think, to the Q&A section. We sort of listed here, the key takeaways. I'm not going to read them. I'm going to leave this in front of you. But happy to take any questions from folks.
Yeah, great presentation, Moti and Kelly. You guys did great. We did get some questions from the audience, so let's get started with that. First question I have here are, what are some best practices for building a business case for an app modernization project?
Best practices for building. Go ahead, Kelly.
Oh, I was like, Moti, I think I'm going to defer to you on this one because I feel like you were kind of an expert on it.
Yeah, I think I sort of touched upon this before. To build a successful business case, it all starts with identifying the pain point. So it's almost before you embark on building the business case, first identify the applications that have the biggest pain points. And when we talk about pain points, these are pain points that the business experiences, right? It's long test and release cycles, or the fact that you're not able to scale, or the fact that it takes you a long time to ramp up people. At the end of the day, it all impacts your competitiveness, right? Your application and its competitiveness. So first, identify those that have the biggest pain points. Then you can move and try to quantify, right, what would be the benefits of modernizing this application. And there are tools that can actually support that, right? Identify the level, the degree of technical debt, try to quantify how many dollars you're investing in this application today, right? What is the TCO of this application? And this is an exercise that we've also conducted with many customers, which is we ask them, try to estimate for every release, how much of that goes into innovation, like new features, new capabilities, versus maintenance and addressing the technical debt. You can actually survey your developers, and then you can actually come up with a number when you look at the total investment in this application, and you can really get to a number that sort of quantifies how much you're investing in the technical debt and maintenance of the application versus the full investment in the application. So you will get to some percentage, maybe 30%, maybe 70%, right? So you have 70%. And if you modernize the application, you break that and you can reduce that number, and you can pick a number, right? For the sake of the business case, let's say you're able to reduce it by 50%. And that is not something that is totally out of the ordinary. If you break a monolith into microservices, you can actually reduce that even less than 10%. But let's say you reduce that investment, quote unquote, in technical debt by 50%, you can then start generating like true quantifiable dollars that are associated with why you want to modernize this application. So hopefully that kind of helps you in terms of building the business case for the modernization. Now, of course, there are other aspects, right? If you're thinking about scalability, right? How much is it costing you today to scale the application? If it's a large monolith and you can't really scale it out, so you need to have maybe a load balancer and a bunch of those monolith instances out there, how much does that cost you versus if you were able to break it into microservices and scale those services on demand, let's say with serverless or some other technology in the cloud? That's another sort of tenet of the business case, right? How much can you save by modernizing in terms of scalability and cost there? Lastly, maybe when you think about the competitiveness, I think that is a little bit harder to quantify, but is there lost revenue because the application is down, or because you don't have the features, you're not competitive, you're losing customers? All of that should be incorporated into the business case. And hopefully when you, obviously it's not something that you can do within 5 minutes, right? You need to spend time to build the business case so you can actually sell it to the management, sell it to the organization. Again, these are costly projects, but the benefits are very clear.
And I love your emphasis, and you've said it many times, like start with the pain points. Often in the tech industry, we start with like a concept or a buzzword, and it's kind of like, okay, everyone else is doing this, I want to go and do this. App modernization should probably not be one of those things that you're like, okay, we just need to do some of that, because then it becomes this kind of amorphous thing that is actually not tied to your business needs or even the health and happiness of your kind of like technical resources, if that makes any sense. Where like in all the different kind of areas that Moti, that you're speaking to, like starting with the pain points of, you know, lost innovation, focusing on technical debt, the potential of losing competitive advantage, you know, but and especially the potential of you know, what it is that the folks who are building your software, what do they feel that they're losing by not moving on to some of these more modern ways of doing software? And I think that there's just a lot to be gained by getting all of those different perspectives when putting together the kind of business case for app modernization projects.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, great answer, guys. Next question we have is, I am modernizing an on-prem .NET SQL website to a .NET AWS Aurora Cloud. I used AWS migration tools, but that tool provided a very basic guideline. Reality was far more complicated. How can AI help in this scenario?
I happen to be familiar with that tool, and AWS are a great partner of ours, so I don't want to throw AWS under the bus, but the tool purpose there is not for complicated applications, I think, and that tool doesn't actually have AI in it. It really just identifies, you know, classes, and so look, this is where when you ask, you know, how can AI help in this scenario? If you have a tool that, you know, I'll speak about our technology because that's what I know best, okay, and how does AI help here? What we use AI when looking to help modernization is really to identify the optimal boundaries of these services, to identify the domains within the application, regardless of how it is written. And the way that it is done is by an agent that learns the different flows in the application. Many times you would deploy that in production, very much like an APM agent. And it would learn the different flows and then use AI to optimize, identify and optimize, let's say, the optimal entry points into each of those call trees that would correspond with a specific flow within the application that really correlates with the potential service that you want to extract. And so if you have a platform that does that type of AI, identifying the domain, and then recommending how to actually increase the exclusivity of those domains or those services, because there are obviously all kinds of interdependencies, including into the database, right? So you need to take into account all the interdependencies. Like if two services are writing into the same database table, that will prevent you from maintaining those services separately, right? So you need to analyze a whole host of interdependencies and recommend how to decompose it, sometimes by adding and refining the boundaries of these services. So you need a technology that can help support that. So AI, I believe that AI is the future of app modernization. Many of these applications, we saw recently an application of 20,000 classes and more, and you simply can't do it manually. You don't know where to start. You don't have the visibility. You don't know the interdependencies. It's an enormous body of code. The developers are not around anymore. You need AI to analyze and help you. Again, not that AI will have, it shouldn't be, let's say, a black box. It should be an assisting technology that exposes the information and allows the architect to interact with it, see the impact of the decision, right? To do that in an interactive manner, and then automate the extraction of the code. Hopefully that, but happy to take that offline and follow up and explain more how AI really helps here.
I feel like that could be another webinar in and of itself, just on AI.
Yeah, that was great insight, Moti. Next question, were there any results in the survey that surprised you?
I will jump in on this one because one of the biggest surprises to me is the question or the results for what stage of app modernization, and 92% of respondents had said that they were in some stage of app modernization. There were 8% that said that they were not, and they had no plans of doing it. And that it shocked me that there were actually folks who had said, nope, this is not on my agenda at all.
Yeah, I mean, to me, somewhat, I don't know if it's a full surprise, but it was very interesting to see the difference between executives and architects, that sort of they see the world a little bit differently. And there are some nuances. Sometimes it's just nuances. Sometimes it's kind of more substantial. I think that setting expectations versus having the right technology, that was quite insightful, at least in my mind.
Yeah, and for me, I would say the most unsurprising result was that architects were like, we need better tools. That one, I'm like, that makes perfect sense to me. And like, yes, let us build them some better tools.
Yeah.
Well, great. Next question comes from the audience. Do you find a modernization roadmap of value to guide the step-by-step conversion?
I think roadmaps we use those terms for that term. That's one of those terms that we use for so many things. But having a roadmap, having a plan is one of the most essential parts of any project, whether it's app modernization or otherwise. So in terms of being able to kind of translate a larger roadmap into kind of like the step-by-step, and being able to adapt that roadmap, I think, is another really important point. Because if you're thinking about app modernization as a here it is and then we're done, as opposed to that this is like a continuous, ongoing type of thing, then that roadmap never really quite has an end, which may not be what people want to hear when they're talking about in terms of making a business use case, which is why having steps and having like very kind of concrete points where you can declare these little points of success, I think is super, super important.
I would second that, Kelly, and it goes back to the prioritization. Prioritization is just another way of thinking about the roadmap, right? You first want to deal with the highest priority where you get the biggest bang for the buck, and you can delay for later, those that maybe have second priority, but by the time you get there, they may already increase in priority. So thinking about this strategically, having a roadmap, pacing yourself, allocating the budget, absolutely a necessity.
And then I keep going back, Moti, to the kind of matrix that you set up in terms of, okay, which apps are, in terms of how difficult will it be to refactor, and like which one are you going to get the most value out of, and just thinking about like the order in which, if you're looking at this portfolio of thousands of applications, which many enterprises are, the kind of what you can learn from like moving some earlier in that modernization roadmap. Some of those app modernization efforts are going to be these great learning experiences in some ways, even if the learning comes from here's what did not work. But getting those, I think, early is important. The ones where it's like you can show some success, but then also it could help you figure out what the rest of this kind of journey looks like.
Yeah.
Great answer. Last question we have today is, what is the benefit of refactoring, and can you elaborate further on the difference between refactoring and rewriting?
And I'm going to jump in. I'm going to jump in real quick. Like refactoring, I love the whole idea of refactoring because one of its objectives is how do you get benefit out of all of the work and all of the knowledge and all of the talent that is already there in your code. Because refactoring is essentially taking the code that you have and adapting it in different ways. As opposed to like, we're just going to throw this all out, or we're just going to write something around this. So for me, this is in some ways refactoring is very much about making use of what you have, not just in terms of code, but in terms of like, there's institutional knowledge in that code. So for me, refactoring just has so much potential. And then Moti, I know you have thoughts on this as well, especially on the refactoring versus rewriting.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that you correctly define it, right? You maintain parts of your original code, but you sort of modify some of it. You maybe replace some of it, but the core stays and you're able to leverage your past investment. But not only that, it helps you accelerate the project. It removes risk because it used to work in the past, or it worked for the past 10 or 15 years, then it will work, or high probability that it will work going forward. Maybe you break some of that code and you add an API layer, and then sort of you do it in an evolutionary manner as opposed to a big bang that you go and rewrite it from scratch. I would argue that refactoring is also the path to rewriting. So if you want to rewrite an application, instead of starting it from fresh, where you have so much risk when you start something from nothing, I would say go and refactor the original application, break it into separate domains, separate services with well-defined interfaces, and then at your own pace, rewrite each of those services, or those where you have the maximum sort of value by rewriting them. And so maybe by the end of this journey, you've rewritten the entire application, right? You went and you rewrote each of those services, but at least you do it in a controlled manner that it is always working. The application is already working. Okay, so you have the old services or the old code, it is working, and then you start rewriting each service on its own. That would be my recommendation, to go about rewriting an application and not to start from scratch. That is where you see the biggest risk, the largest kind of losses, and when you think about the cost and the failure, it is usually tied with everyone wants to write it from scratch. So yeah, write it, but break it first and then rewrite it. I think that's a good note to end this.
That's a great note to end on.
Perfect, guys. As we wrap up our Q&A, I'd like to thank you, Kelly and Moti, for the amazing presentation today. And thank you to the audience for attending today's webcast, sponsored by vFunction, presented by Mag.
Thank you.
Thanks all.